Dustin. This is Kelly Carlin.
Kelly, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
Well, it's great to have you on today, and I want to talk about the new book, A Carlin Home Companion, Growing Up with George. Is it more of a biography about your life or your dad's, or maybe a little of both?
It's my memoir. It's about my life, and my dad being my dad, he's in it. So, yeah, there's parts of him that are in it, and I talk a little bit about his career and what was going on in our family, as his career was changing and evolving and the things that were going on. But it's basically my story about what it is to be a kid of someone like that and our experiences as a family and then my experiences as an adult.
Well, when you were growing up, did you kind of have a sense of, what your dad was all about, or, how important or how big of an influence he was to so many people, or was he kind of just a normal guy at home?
Well, when I was really young, until about 1970, my dad was the short-haired, clean-cut comic and was on the road a lot and did a lot of TV. So I understood he was on TV and that he was a comedian and that was his job and he had to go on tour, go to clubs and stuff like that. But, and then in 1970, he changed and he grew his hair out and grew a beard and did different material, became the counterculture George Carlin, the class clown guy. And that was, very different, going out to college campuses and larger venues and him, having a lot of people really, kind of worship him like a rock star kind of a feeling. So that was different. But then really it wasn't until like my teen years and my 20s that I really saw the impact he'd had on the culture when I was like at UCLA and my professor was like, today we're going to study compare and contrast essays. And I have a perfect example of that. And they like push the play button on a boombox and my dad's baseball football comes out, and it's like, oh, wow.
Yeah, I know your dad seemed like he kind of had a bit of maybe an internal struggle with trying to be the straight-laced guy and then kind of switching over to what he eventually became.
Yeah, definitely, and he certainly has talked a lot about that in interviews and his own posthumous memoir, Last Words. But yeah, that was a big part of his career. He had a lot of success as the kind of television '60s guy, and then but was not that person on the inside. He was a very progressive person on the inside. All of his friends were musicians who were being able to freely speak their minds and express themselves through their work, and he wasn't. He was, being shackled and having to not only work clean, but to not be as subversive as he wanted to be. And, people like Lenny Bruce and Mort Sahl were his heroes. And so, yeah, he finally made the leap in 1970, and, our lives changed because of it. He was making less money for a while, and we moved from a big house down into an apartment and stuff. But then very quickly, his first albums after, he made the change were very successful. And, and he became this force in comedy that he's known today.
And on that same hand, I'm wondering, obviously later on he was known kind of for different rants, I guess what he would call free-floating hostility, a lot of anger on stage. But off stage, was he a pretty easygoing guy? He seemed like he was probably pretty laid back.
Yeah, pretty laid back, definitely. I mean, there were definitely some things that pissed him off in the world and certain types of people, which he talked about on stage. But he didn't walk around in like a sense of outrage all the time. I mean, he really channeled his outrage, and that's what it was, as a theatrical device on stage. He used it in order to get points across to the audience, to kind of teach us all this perspective he was trying to teach us. And and he never talked about it this way. He would never say that he was trying to wake up an audience. But, when you use that kind of theatricality, you are trying to wake up the audience. You're trying to get their attention. And, Sam Kinison had, come to be, and he saw Sam on stage and he thought, wow, this is what we have to do now. We kind of have to scream at the audiences because they're not paying attention anymore.
Well, and it does seem like some of the material, he did 10, 20 years ago about kind of the decline of society and, the way things were changing, kind of seems like it's all coming true now with all the, police scandals and school shootings and, Donald Trump and all this stuff going on.
Yeah, he was, I feel, always a very wise, prophetic man and could really look very clearly at what our society really was and didn't buy into the distractions that most people buy into that kind of, ease our way through this stuff. He had a very sharp eye and a very critical eye on things. And, he did talk about things way ahead of people, the more mainstream culture even dealing with it. And I think that's, why his fans loved him so much, because they were also seeing it through his eyes. And, he was the only one speaking about it, back then. And, it's taken time for now all of us to have this conversation, whether it's about guns or drugs or corruption in Washington and money and really business owning our country. I mean, that was his main thesis, was that, we're not in charge. The people with all the money, the billionaires, are in charge, and that's just gotten worse and worse, certainly over the last 10 years.
Yeah, most definitely. And again, the book, A Carlin Home Companion, Growing Up with George, is out now, and I know a lot of the listeners out there, and me included, probably have an idea, like a romantic idea of having George Carlin as a father, but was it tough to kind of humanize him or reveal things about him maybe that the fans maybe wouldn't know about?
Well, it's a risk, certainly, and there was some anxiety inside of me. But, the bottom line is that I didn't write this book to reveal some, dark side of my dad or something like that. I mean, we had a couple of dark years, our family did. My mother was an alcoholic. She almost died from alcoholism. My dad had, a pretty serious bout with cocaine during those years. And it was tough. It was tough on all of us. But my mom got sober, and our family got through it, and my parents stayed together. And really, the reason I wrote this book was to share my experience, strength, and hope. That, there was a lot of dysfunction in my childhood. I was an only child. I became a parentified kid. The whole codependent family thing, we were a poster child for that. And I certainly was. And that took its toll throughout my young adult life. And I made a lot of bad choices kind of based on my training, as they say. But I had a great foundation of love, and when my parents weren't high and drunk, they were incredible human beings and very loving and very fun and great parents. Laissez-faire parents, for sure. I mean, we didn't have a lot of rules in our house, but that's part of it. And I think my dad never really talked a lot about his private life, and so part of me talking about my private life is revealing some of my dad's private life. And from the feedback I've gotten from fans and from comedians, they see this as a very loving and admirable portrayal of my family and my father especially. And they're really happy that I've humanized him, because they get to see that he is really like everyone else. He's a father, he's a husband, he's a man, an artist trying to do his work, and yet he's human. He falters, he doesn't make the best decisions all the time, and he had bouts of depression himself and some, addiction, and, we're all here just trying to figure it all out ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to say, you are, a great writer in your own right, and besides the book, I know you have the one-woman show and a podcast, a radio show. I got to imagine it was probably tough to get to this point and make a name for yourself and not be just seen as, George Carlin's daughter.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rest of my life I'll always be fighting against that projection that people do with kids of celebrities. But, I have my own point of view. I have work that I do in the world. I see things sometimes like my dad, but I see things also in a very different way. I think my work is very psychological and kind of soul-searching, and that's the work I'm here to do. It's more of an emotional, personal work, and I'm very proud that I found my way through that. And writing this book is really kind of, for me, like the end of like this process of me trying to discover myself and find myself and finally put myself out there. I mean, it's one thing to do it in your own home, but to finally put yourself out there in front of a public, and especially a public that's, in love with my dad, especially. I mean, not everyone, but, the fans are. And to come around and for them to see me, it's been very fulfilling. But, yeah, I mean, the big chunk of my book is really about me finding my way through that. And I think a lot of people can relate to, even if your parent's not famous, but just, growing up in the shadow of a parent or or a brother or a sibling of some kind that's kind of always had the limelight or always been the perfect one in the family or whatever it is. We all have our shadows that we have to work through, and I've just done mine publicly and through this book.
Excellent. Again, we're on the phone today with Kelly Carlin talking about the book, A Carlin Home Companion, Growing Up with George. And I know besides the book, there's also an exhibit that's going on at the Grammy Museum.
Yeah, it's really cool. If you're in LA, anytime through March of next year, they've got a little exhibit of my dad. I've got all my dad's stuff. That's right, people, I have George Carlin stuff. And we went through it and found some of the choice pieces that really tell his story, his evolution of his career and his life. And it's great. It's great. I'm excited to share this stuff with the fans. So, yeah, if you're in LA, make it part of your, your trip to, part of your tourist trip. And if you live in LA, definitely come by.
Awesome. And of course, I listed off all the stuff that you have going on, so I imagine you must have another project in the works or something that's coming up here soon?
Well, we're looking to get some dates, a few more dates for my solo show, and I'll be doing that throughout the fall of 2016, and then I'll put that to bed. And so we're looking for that right now, and I'm going to take the fall and figure out what my next book is. I loved writing the book. I'm a writer first. I share that with my dad, and love communicating in that form. I'm going to ramp my podcast, Waking from the American Dream, back up and re-fiddle with it a little bit. And I'm always, my show, Kelly Carlin Shows on Sirius XM once a month, where I interview comedians, and that's always a fun conversation. And who else knows what else will be happening? You never know. I've got some speaking gigs coming up. I'm doing the Reason Rally in June in the Washington Mall. Always popping up somewhere and doing something.
Awesome. Again, Kelly, it's been wonderful talking with you. And you mentioned all the people that your father has impacted, and I'm one of them. In fact, I have a 3-month-old son at home, and his name is Carlin.
Oh, that's so sweet. I love that.
So it's really great to talk with you. I hope to meet you someday.
Oh, absolutely. Where are you? What part of the world are you in?
We're in Minnesota.
Oh, Minnesota. My husband's family is from Faribault.
Oh, that's less than an hour from where we are, so maybe I would run into you someday.
Yeah, someday we'll come visit Minnesota. I've never been. I've never been to that part of Minnesota, so yeah, that would be great.
Excellent. Well, again, it means a lot to me. Thanks a lot, Kelly.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.